I initially asked us to ask ourselves, what is movement building? And now I'm going to ask you to just capture what you had thought was movement building. And if you didn't conclude the question, that particular question actually capture that we were unable to define what movement building is, then I want us to reflect on what she has shared.
I did AWLI in 2013. Most of us can be able just to relate to AWLI as being that seed. Something is planted in anyone who participates in the space. Movement building grounded on not just the knowledges that are from the different cross movements. So whether it's the economic or the climate justice or the SRHR or wherever it is, but one that also equips with the skills, with the experience, the lived realities.
My reflections began when I got this email to come into this space. Hence my question, what is movement building? What are we building? Who is in the movement? And I'm glad that the study findings, I think it was one of the, is it the highlights, achievements, or recommendations that spoke about the personal development of the participants of the AWLI. And I have been mentored in an ecosystem with feminists who emphasize on the importance of positioning yourself as an individual in the work you do.
There's a lot of anti-rights movement, a lot of surveillance of activists. So we find ourselves moving, we are changing. And it also defines like a movement. It doesn't have a particular name or particular definition that now this is the movement, now this is it. Like it keeps on changing.
So when we asked the question of what is movement building, Joyce said, I thought I knew what movement building is, but being in here, I'm wondering, what is it? And so in our conversation, honestly, I hadn't thought about it as well, but I shared something which is something you were sharing. The movement will change. That's why we're struggling to define it. And I'm wondering whether we should get bogged down in defining what is the movement.
Movement building, in our definition, is that there have to be, there need to be a shared goal. And if the shared goal is the liberation, empowerment, and all that, what does that really look like?
We're building on the shoulders of those who came before us. I don't think there's a universal definition for anything. You think about peace, you think about security, you think about safety, you even think about war, or even perhaps think about the definition of the term definition. We can never agree on what anything is. What we always agree on, however, is what it is not.
Movement building has strategy, movement building has consistency, movement building has collective action, and movement building has liberation. We also included a fifth tenet. We said that you have to infuse an element of healing in movement building.
There's a need for us to define who makes up a movement. We think organizations form these movements, but organizations are made of people. Individuals get into these organizations. So we as individuals play a central role in sustaining the movement and not necessarily the organizations that we are working for.
Just want to hear your reflections, which is for you to share strategies and recommendations for movement building, given the growing polycrisis we are seeing, whether you want to pick it from a Kenya perspective, a regional perspective, a global perspective.
I think when we have the conversations about strategies, sometimes we want to jump into thinking of new strategies, which is amazing. But I think even sometimes reflecting on strategies that have worked, and then we need to ask ourselves, how do we strengthen what has worked? And one of the strategies that I was thinking around is around solidarity, because solidarity brings in an aspect that allows us to say, hey, we will be able to be very organic in terms of we know who are the owners of the movement strengtheners, the movement holders, the movement builders, the movement people who are going to interrogate and challenge those norms and systems. The whole issue of another strategy that I feel has worked is as a whole, we call it mentorship. There are times I call it femtorship. because mentorship sometimes comes with this notion of the still top-down kind of way. Whether you are in your whatever ages, there's something that you're bringing to the table. There are tools, there are systems, there are skills, there's some knowledges that you're bringing.
Do we have a common understanding or definition of the enemy? And this could be literally or figuratively speaking. And the understanding of that enemy can sometimes water down the third strategy, where I'd like to say the wins of the movement. Celebrating those small wins. The Femicide March, for example, women came across countries. That is a win in and of itself. Before we go again to say, let's form a secretariat. Who's funding this secretariat? Whoever is funding, who is going to be the custodian of the funds? All of those things, they water down the wins that we should celebrate and acknowledge.
We are looking at funding that is coming from external, coming from through development aid, and fail to recognize the resources that we have that can actually sustain these movements.
I think the strategies first comes from us. There are some that have worked. There are some that we're still working on. Recognizing our diverse voices within these movements, and especially the marginalized voices. An example is when we had the Occupy Everywhere Gen Z movement and all that was happening. The recognition of diversities of women within the movement was kind of carpeted, like swept away. Part of our strategy is recognizing rest and just taking a step back and let others continue. You'll come back when you're okay, and when others are burnt out, they'll take time to rest. The documentation of it will ensure that the generations that are coming, that they know there was all these movements working to ensure that our lives, we enjoy it the way we're enjoying right now.
If we look at the mainstream reporting, it's not going to capture certain things, right? So the question is, how are we going to document in a feminist way? And maybe feminist way means it brings out the everyday space, the everyday resistance, the everyday celebration that Melissa was talking about.
How do we use the structures we have, the systems we have, the power we have in ways that can enable that movement, right? And enable the flow. Recognizing, though, that we are sitting in spaces that have a colonial history, that are patriarchal by nature to this day. So how do we grapple with that as individuals, yeah? And there is, I think there are moments too where I'm like, should we be resourcing in this way when our resourcing processes are challenging? We know, we've heard from women's rights organizations, the reporting, the administrative time. I think it was Melissa was speaking about that earlier, right? The amount of time that it takes to process these agreements then takes away from some of the movement work itself.
CSW 69, it's going to be a declaration. There's not going to be a agreed conclusion, which will be adopted on day one of CSW. So then the question is that also we were asking ourselves in Addis, how can we also, as we're thinking about revitalization, be able to bring in our lived realities? We live here. We don't live in New York. Can we think about rotating CSW? Can we think about how do we ensure that we resource the girls to go before, their adoption? Because how can we confidently say that the declaration is speaking to our realities when we are not there?
If CSW is a far-fetched idea, the other way to ask that question is, how do we revitalize the normative frameworks, right? To work for us, so that it's not like the movement is in this direction and these things are sitting somewhere.
We were envisioning a movement that the funding or the funders or the donors are bold. Whether that starts to be us within ourselves thinking about how do we fund the movement ourselves, or the partners, donor partners or funding partners that we have, and encouraging them to remain bold in this time. Because what we're seeing now in this polycrisis is that they're shifting priorities, and that makes us also start infighting within ourselves, within the movement, because of those shifting priorities. And so we would also want funders that appreciate the well-being of the movement, and the movement being us, yeah?
On one side, movements are tired, and we've spoken about that. On the other side, movements are more political, movements are radical, movements are not depoliticized. For me, I'm the kind of feminist that doesn't believe that we can get liberation from institutions that were created without our liberation in mind.
We have organizations that address almost every other thing, and people are still coming up with new organizations instead of working together because we are trying to address the same issue. So we should work collaboratively.
About CSW, we debated and debated. I think it's becoming impossible to use the master's tools.
I believe the dynamics, the country level dynamics also sometimes play out in the regional spaces and in the global spaces. So I think what is important for us is to, again, identify the shared values, the shared visions that we have, and agree on what role we want to play in the different movements. And somebody said that sometimes it's even okay to play a role in the back end or behind the scenes where, not you wouldn't want to be known, you just want to play in the background. There are those who have experienced, can I say, violations or challenges with the movement in terms of older versus younger. How do we sustain an intergenerational movement?
For me, it's the acknowledgement and recognition of those that have been there before. I think it starts from there. We cannot negate the fact that they were there, they did the work, and they actually laid the ground for all of us. And then the other thing is also, for me, I would say, you remember the conversation you're having around shared goal. What do we want to see? What world do we want to envision? Are we not all fighting towards that world? We all have our own unique contribution to the movement.
The kind of wisdom that older women have been able to bring in the feminist space, I am humbled by being in their presence. But that being said, I also want to introduce a concept called transformative justice. Transformative justice is a theory that was introduced by Black American, I think, feminists, and they call for alternative forms of justice. What does justice look like for African feminist activists? How can feminist spaces practice transformative feminist justice beyond carceral feminism? Carceral feminism is the kind of feminism where we react. We do not pause. I think for us, we need to have feminist healing circles.
I want to direct this question to Jennifer. In your experience, are there movements that have inspired your work at Groots?
I should say that Groots Kenya is a movement that has inspired me. Groots Kenya movement started from 1995 with the coming of HIV/AIDS. We used a strategy that used to capture many from the society, because after the training on HIV/AIDS and home-based care, we went down to the community. We met with the leaders, like the administration, and there we formed a worker plan, how we are going to reach the community at large. I also want to say that we engaged our youths, like the girls now, even in counseling and voluntary counseling and testing. They joined the support group. Those who are infected, they joined the support group. And here we captured a lot of youth in our movement.
The sex workers movement came in as groups because of the issues of HIV. And that has been tagged to sex workers movement up to now. And even spaces that we go to, we have been brought up or socialized or programmed in a way that we talk as vectors and beg as vectors for us probably to get the fundings and continue. And most of our funders or partners usually work towards HIV and GBV. So as navigating into the space and getting to start to work on issues of decrim, trying to work with ILO, the decent work agenda, sex workers having labor rights, of which we've tried with countries, but us making a step and having conversation, we're also seeing as small wins that we were told to accept.
We've heard that there are shifts in funding, there are shifts in priorities, there are shifts in values. So what strategies can we use to
bridge the divides within the movement. So we can have a quick round and then wrap up this conversation.
The first strategy that came to my mind is narrative setting. And I feel like for us as feminist activists, we need to capture narrative setting. And how are we going to do that? Feminist communications, all right? Our feminist messaging must be different by developing and curating messages that speak to them. Let the messages speak to their emotions. Speak to them as mothers, speak to them as fathers, speak to them as men, all right? It's an opportunity for us to sway them to our side.
Picking up from everything that everyone has said, one of the things is that we need to also decolonize the power dynamics that we have within the movement. If you are in a movement and something has gone wrong, what is your accountability and responsibility to make sure that every single person who started, who was there, is still part of the movement?
Since Roots Kenya, we are a movement. We work with 5 goals. And our first goal is on movement building. So when we have a project, most of our counties, we do agriculture. So we are bringing together our farmers so that we can sell our products collectively so that we can sustain the movement. So we are doing a lot of work in the ground to make sure the movement is being sustained. Thank you.
I say this with love as an insider-outsider because I consider myself to be an insider-outsider. How often do we create space to have these conversations? Let not this be the last conversation. I'd like to ask you that we close this space, but then where we are going to close it is we are going to affirm each other.
I'd like to affirm my sister here. Anne, why I'm affirming her is because I work really closely with her, and we've really come a long way in building each other, both personally, professionally, and yeah, I'm happy to see where she is, and she affirms me a lot by the online. She has a popular blog.
I just want to say that what I have had in this room today has been nothing short of inspirational. So in the morning, I was feeling a bit funny, but then Melissa spoke. My day just changed, and you touched my soul. I like having conversations that speak to my heart, because at the end of the day, we are spirit. And so you reached out to my spirit.
My name is Lord Swalusala, and I affirm AMwA. Since that Auli, they have made me an intentional disruptor. If I want to write about abortion, and I believe in getting children by choice, not by chance. I believe love is love, matters LGBTIQ. I intentionally do my stories and publish them somewhere else.
I want to affirm Rachel and Roots Kenya. And wherever Roots is, they bring in the grassroots women to speak for themselves. And I feel like that is something that I want to model in our own organization, which is Akili Dada.
I'd like to affirm AMwA and everyone in this room and my sibling that our dreams are bolder than our fears and any perceived enemies we have. And I see you. I see you all.
First, thanks to AMwA for curating this beautiful space, and to everyone in this space for making me not feel left out, because being the only masked person in this space wasn't so easy, but thank you all for making my time easy.
For me, I'd like to affirm everyone, and also Nyawera, the Girls Resource Center, the way you organize with girls in Machakos. It's breathtaking. It's something also learn.
I think we are redefining the movement. We are changing the face of the movement. And I know the challenges that we have to go through while doing it. So I'm affirming you. I'm appreciating you. We are together.
Affirmation to all of us for the boldness, the frankness.
I'd like to affirm everyone who is in the room. I appreciate all the work that you're doing for feminists and for women and for gender diverse people and for all marginalized groups of people.
I also want to affirm everybody in the room. Then those who planned for this meeting, I appreciate. I also want to affirm Roots Kenya for creating a space for grassroots women. I'm proud to be a Roots Kenya champion.
I'd like to affirm AMwA for creating such a beautiful space. It was definitely awesome. I had a good time today.
I want to affirm everybody in this room who has participated. Apart from the little that I've shared, I was in a learning experience.
For me, I want to affirm the Kenyan sisters, all of us first, but also the Kenyan sisters. We know the struggle. We've been there, but as everyone has said, is that we are seeing that the movement is changing. And maybe this is the time the shift is going to happen, and I'm excited for that. I'm optimistic, and I'm hoping that we shall get there. But I think also I just want to give flowers to AMwA,
I want to affirm everyone in this room, and mostly the Kenyan siblings. Oftentimes when we organize a space and put out invitations around movement building and conversations around feminist movement buildings, there's always that hesitation to how will the conversation go. And the second group of people that I want to affirm are the AMwA staff. All of us have affirmed AMwA generally, but I want to specifically affirm Chimwemwe for holding space, for ensuring that this comes together and it does happen in Kenya.
We struggle at individual, at family, at community, at national, at global level, but we are always there. So thank you, everyone. So for me, again, for the parking lot, myself and is just to introspect and think deeply about how we localize power within the spaces that we have influence on, so that we do not actually shift again the pain to those that we are trying to support.
I want to affirm all of you for showing up and for sharing the insights. Clearly, Kenya, we are doing good. So there was a reason why AMwA had to establish itself here, right? So I affirm all of you. I see you, I hear you. Now I know your faces. I know the AMwA allies and the think tanks. If I need to run anything by you, I know the people who are all in this room. So thank you very much.